It finally happened again. For the first time in several years, people's reaction to a new Pokémon game release is finally overwhelmingly positive. The Crown Tundra is the second and final DLC for Pokémon Sword and Shield, and the thing many people wanted the 8th generation games to be in the first place. The Isle of Armor, which released around 5 months earlier, didn't quite excite people as much as the Crown Tundra did now. Even when the DLC was first announced, the Isle of Armor's theme of growth seemed a lot less interesting and promising as the theme of exploration that the Crown Tundra would bring. Especially because the main Sword and Shield experience desperately lacked exploration in many ways. The routes and towns were small and simple, and the wild area, while big, was too open and too barren to really warrant the term exploring. And after the Isle of Armor already proved how much better Game Freak finally became at designing an open area, expectations only grew to see how well the second DLC would handle exploration and if its additions would finally make Sword and Shield a worthy and full Pokémon game. It all starts out pretty terribly actually. Just like in the Isle of Armor, you can visit this DLC area immediately after unlocking the wild area of the main game. But while the Isle of Armor is designed to be played either very early in your playthrough, which you shouldn't do because XP charm makes the game even easier, or just after finishing the game, the Crown Tundra is specifically endgame content. The first battle with Peony has him use level 70 Pokemon, which, if you're not prepared for that, are probably gonna defeat you. It's actually quite weird that the game doesn't give you any warning, but interestingly the story just continues even if you lose, though you should definitely only stick around if you've already beaten the main game. It's quite an interesting and quite unexpected decision to make the Crown Tundra specifically post-game content. The Isle of Armor had a sort of level scaling, so that everyone who had already beaten the game wouldn't have to battle level 12 Pokemon. They could have easily done the same for the Crown Tundra, but since they haven't, we should obviously see this whole DLC as an addition to the post-game content of Sword and Shield, which in and of itself seems like a great thing. Compared to pretty much all previous Pokémon games, Sword and Shield were the only ones that didn't offer any new areas to explore after becoming champ. Even the very first games opened up Cerulean Cave, and X and Y had Galar City, with all the other games having way more than that. Sure, now you have to pay extra money to unlock these DLC areas, but that is more of a problem with the main games, not with the DLC we're talking about right now. After this imperfect beginning, the new game world finally opens up, but the game clearly directs you towards the Dynamax adventures. So even though you could now pretty much go everywhere and explore the whole Crown Tundra by yourself, most people probably followed Peony into the cave, which makes a lot of sense considering he's the main driving force and quest giver for all the legendary missions. But the problem is that this leads to pretty much the first hour of the DLC being either cutscenes with Peony and his daughter, or your first Dynamax adventure run, instead of freeform exploration of the beautiful new map. And it truly is beautiful, or at least as beautiful as something with the mediocre graphics of Sword and Shield can be. There were so many times while walking around where I thought to myself, this would all look so beautiful if only the game was pretty. So you have the ice ocean and views from caves far up in the mountains down to the gigantic tree, and it all just feels so incredibly frustrating. Especially because, and the Isle of Armor was already a good example of this, the people at Game Freak have finally been allowed to play a video game that was released in the last 15 years and decided to build a map that doesn't feel completely empty and outdated. The second sub-area you visit is a village, with people and houses. The previous wild areas of the game didn't have anything, not even anywhere close to this. And the music even changes once you enter the village, which was one of the things that bothered me on the Isle of Armor. With areas that are vastly different in feel, yet seamlessly connected, the music should at least somewhat reflect the change in scenery and atmosphere. It should sound different in the desert than in the jungle or on the ocean, and now it finally does, in 2 of the 60 new areas. And sure, while Freezington isn't exactly impressive in design or scale or anything, like most of the settlements of the main game, this did kind of fit the narrative, the copy-paste house interiors being the exception. This is supposed to be a small settlement in the middle of nowhere, with no one living here other than some old folks who have been here forever and will probably stay here forever as well. What I did appreciate, and I wonder how many people actually noticed this, is that all the NPC dialogue actually changes throughout the story. So while you only have maybe 5 people to talk to, their text changes more than half a dozen times. which gave everything a much needed layer of personality. It's still nothing compared to Dragon Quest, but I hope that Game Freak continues in this direction, because it is a pretty simple and cost-effective way to make the world feel a lot less stale and give story events more of an impact. Back to the world design, I really liked how the Isle of Armor was constructed. The island setting was used very freely, so you didn't just have beaches, water and small islands, but also a jungle and a desert. Compared to that, the Crown Tundra is a lot more coherent in its design. I did end up enjoying the Isle of Armor a bit more though, which is sad because I usually love colder settings. It's just that most of the areas don't look as visually distinct as they could, blend in a bit too well into the next area, and some are just way too small, like the graveyard or the really cool looking area with the leafless white trees. The highlight is the frozen sea for me though, which greatly benefits from the better inclusion of overworld Pokémon compared to the main game. Still, all the ruins of old farmsteads really give you a great feeling for the history of this place, and I really like the layout of the area as well, with a believable transition from the snowy tops down to the temperate coastal area around the giant tree. The tree really stands out, in a positive way though, and not just because of the really fun hidden boss fight here, but because Pokémon doesn't often include these kinds of specifically unnatural looking landmarks. But when looking at the area from the angle that it is all about exploration, I do have to say that I am kind of disappointed. While I'm inclined to say that the core concept was somewhat achieved, it never truly felt like I was actually exploring the Crown Tundra. I never really felt like I found something. It was simply way too small for that. On launch day, the Giant's Bed area, the big one just behind Freezington, was engulfed in fog, which actually made navigation really hard and helped paint over the fact that the Registry ruins aren't really all that far away from Freezington at all. It would have been great if this area was actually built around the concept of fog and you not being able to see very far, but sadly Sword and Shield still handle weather absolutely terrible, so it's really hard to replicate the experience, which wasn't groundbreaking or terribly fun to be honest, but it did help my enjoyment. I just hope that for the next games we're not just gonna get a much better weather system, but also a really big world, so that it might actually feel like you're randomly stumbling upon something completely forgotten by time. That would be actual exploration. Size would also add on to something I liked more and more the more I played these games, and specifically the DLC, the lack of easy healing options. When you're out in the field exploring, it's really tricky to fully heal up your team, if you don't want to continually use items. Sure, if you ignore trying to catch new Pokémon, you're probably not gonna have to heal at all, but once Game Freak adds trainer battles to these open areas, the fact that you can't easily heal and continue where you left off might actually become a huge problem. For now, I just laughed out loud when I realized that the entire Crown Tundra, not counting the Galerion Star Tournament, had only one regular trainer battle, far less than the Isle of Armor had. But even the wild Pokémon aren't really that big of a problem. Normally they would constantly chip away at your health. Zubat even returns, and I legit was really happy about seeing them in the caves. But with wild Pokémon being easily avoidable, you don't even have that either, which leads to the really interesting problem of just how different the experiences of someone playing this and the previous DLC can be. I personally stick to the story, thoroughly explore everything I see, and try to catch every Pokémon I haven't caught yet, meaning it takes me quite a while to get through all the new content. But another person might just completely ignore all the wild Pokémon. After all, they've already beaten the game, already have an established team by their side, and know full well how many legendaries there are to catch and how annoyingly time and sanity consuming that is. So they spend less time everywhere and might feel like the DLC just flew by, is empty and way too light on content. They might even miss some great details like the world building with the ruins or the plaques that tell you some more of the backstory. They might not realize that we finally have a cemetery in Galar, something that every Pokémon region has. But at the same time they might miss just how weird the caves are. Now don't get me wrong, the caves of the Crown Tundra are absurdly refreshing and exciting compared to anything previously in the game, although I have to recognize the step forward that the Isle of Armor did with its caves. They're complex, at least on paper, quite well designed, and they exist, like at all. But they are, simultaneously, really bad. Like, go in one of the caves, stand still, and just look at everything. The textures are obviously not great, and even worse, literally identical everywhere. When you're tasked to design an area, maybe specifically for an RPG with a world like this, you're gonna ask yourself one thing: how can I make my stuff stand out? How can I create a cave that is not just a cave, but one that looks great and interesting? And there have been great examples in Pokemon history, like Chargestone Cave or Reversal Mountain in Unova, which are visually completely unique and interesting. When creating a cave, you want to avoid just building brown tubes and calling it a day, but this is pretty much what they did. Even a simple texture change between the three caves, some simple stalagmites or any kind of ice inside of them would have been enough to make them stand out from one another, but the way they are in the game now, looking terrible and not even being close to having actually remarkable level design, they just barely met the bar for shippable content in my opinion. That's basically the same thing I heard people say about Dynamax Adventures pre-release, especially the map view of it. To be fair, in the announcement it did sound like there would be a lot more behind venturing deep into a Dynamax den, so to see the simple 2D map where you can select straight and simple paths was kind of a disappointment at first. But actually playing it was really fun. Honestly, I did not expect to enjoy this part of the DLC so much, especially after having done hundreds and hundreds of regular raid battles already. At first I was really impressed just how much better these battles were than regular raid battles, even though there haven't been too many adjustments. None of the Pokemon have shields, and they dispel a lot less frequently. This finally opens up options to strategize and use non-damaging attacks without wasting a turn and dooming the battle for failure. Luckily it also speeds up the battles as well, which is well needed given that you have to battle 4 times to complete one adventure, unless you're playing the endless version of course. The AI partners are also a tad less terrible. Instead of only pulling from a small pool of mostly terrible Pokemon, they now use the exact same rental Pokemon as you do, meaning it is a lot easier to end up with 3 NPCs that actually use damaging attacks and hold their own. And even if they don't attack, their other moves will likely help you as well. Still, it is a bit weird just how eager they are to use status moves over and over again. If I was a bit more cynical, I would call this a pay-to-win mechanic, given how you have to pay for online play on the Switch. But so far I've been able to win most adventures on at least the second try. Except Zygarde, which seems to be terrible for everyone. This stupid green snake thingy that didn't even get its own game. Ugh. But NPCs still can't Dynamax or use their brains to select Pokemon or items that might be needed later on. Which is why, if you have the option, you should really play this online. Because, surprise, the online play is actually working pretty well. I never had to wait more than 30 seconds to find a full group and start our adventure, with most people being smart enough to not doom every run immediately. Also, there is no way to show off your great shiny Pokemon collection or advertise weird websites, which I've seen way too much of in the random trades. Someone should do something about that. But speaking of shiny Pokemon, should you have the shiny charm, every Pokemon caught during Dynamax Adventures has a 1 in 100 chance of being shiny, which, if you're not familiar with Pokemon or not good with numbers, is insanely high. And since you can pretty much get every single Pokemon available in Sword and Shield here, including legendaries, that means you can easily hunt for shinies here. Maybe too easily. I wonder if they made the chances so high because after a while, especially with battle animations turned on, all the fights start to be really tedious. And if you're playing online with random people, you're gonna run into the same kind of legendaries way too often. Like, I haven't seen my favorite Pokemon Celesteela at all, but I've battled against at least 3 Ho-Oh, which don't even normally show up in Shield, which I'm playing. All in all, I really like the tactical possibilities of every Dynamax adventure. Which way should we go? Should we get an item from the backpacker and have to battle a dangerous Pokemon for our team, or take the easy route? It's hands down the most fun, long-term engagement I've had in Pokemon games in quite a while actually, and with all the great rewards, among others the great addition of the ability patch, it's a really worthwhile addition to the game. Another addition are the around 100 new Pokemon added with the recent patch, most of which you can catch in either the open world or Dynamax Adventures. In the Isle of Armor I had way too much fun catching all the newly introduced Pokemon, even though they obviously weren't really new. And I have to say I am kind of disappointed with the Crown Tundra, even though I predicted the problems I ended up having with it. Since many of the newly introduced Pokemon are legendaries, you're not going to be able to catch them in the wild. And without the fossil Pokemon it would have been just 16 lines of Pokemon, if I counted correctly, that you can find in all the tall grass, which might be the reason they've decided to also put the fossils in the open world. In the end it never felt as satisfying to catch them all this time compared to last, but maybe that's just because I'm still frustrated that so many great Pokemon are just going to be left behind and not be available in these games for maybe ever. As for new Pokemon and new forms, there isn't really anything with such legendaries, except of course Slowking, which feels like an absolute afterthought, and that's all I have to say about that. The other new Pokemon, or legendaries, are dealt with in the story, or should I say stories, of this DLC, so we should continue with that. After the whole stuff with Peony and his daughter at the Dynamax Adventures, we finally go to Freezington and start the 3, or rather 4, main quests to get all the legendaries. The first one, and also the one that's got the most effort put into it, is the story about Calirax. Just like with the Isle of Armor, if you only look at the specific stuff you have to do to advance the story, it all feels weirdly short and even cheap. Talk to some people, talk to more people, find a person to talk to, then read some books, so you can talk even more. Especially the beginning feels really dragged out by this. And then once you are finally told to step out of town and find the mayor, he immediately goes back home and the story continues there. Game Freak really didn't find the proper balance with the story, but in the end, even if individually the story isn't really amazing, it's pretty well done. For what feels like the first time, we're actually interacting with the legendary Pokemon and learn about it and its relation to the world directly. And it's all handled very lightheartedly, with Calirax using Peony's body to talk to us. Its personality and character are very distinct and fun, and after Cosmog in Sun and Moon, Calirax feels like only the second legendary Pokemon I caught, which I actually kinda cared about. Even its design grew on me, in part because the game itself acknowledges its weird head, or rather crown, directly, and I really liked the, sadly long before leaked, twist of the horse on which it rides. I also like that we can choose which horse we would like ourselves. It gives each playthrough at least a tiny bit of variety, and I wish they would do more like that in the future, instead of hard version exclusives. The idea of the Diglett side quest in the Isle of Armor was really good. I loved looking everywhere for them and getting a lowland Pokemon as a reward. Sadly, there isn't really anything comparable in the Crown Tundra. Instead, we can help Sonia track down the footprints of the Swords of Justice, leading to catching all 3 of them and later on even Keldeo. I didn't expect a lot when we learned from Hop in the last DLC that Sonia would show up here, but she has pretty much no proper dialogue or anything, which is kind of a shame, because Game Freak again seems too cautious to actually continue or at least build on the main story from Sword and Shield. Sure, Sonia shows up in a professor outfit and everything, but there's nothing new to our interactions with her, nothing we learn about her as a character or anything really. We also don't learn anything about these 4 legendaries and what they are doing here. We just catch them, be happy to get another free mythical after Deoxys in Auras and continue on our way. A similar problem pops up with Peony. He is a great new character and he actually gets a ton of dialogue. If you talk to him and show him the legendary Pokemon you caught in the Dynamax Adventures, he has something to say about every single one of them, most of which is quite funny. Oh, and also he's Rose's younger brother. The game hints at this and later confirms it with his rare League card, but nothing really comes from it. We don't hear him talk about anything Rose did or get a new insight into how Rose became the person he was. We only get bits and pieces of a seemingly interesting backstory. And given that this is the final piece of DLC, and therefore the final piece of Sword and Shield, we're probably never going to learn anything more than the few things we have. And that's just really frustrating, just like seemingly everything about Sword and Shield. Especially because they've also shown that they can do some great character stuff, with the new Galerion Star Tournament. Once again, this isn't even close to a proper facility of a battle frontier, and it doesn't even pretend to want to be that, considering the easy difficulty. It's instead something that would have been great to have in the game from the beginning, especially because battling with a partner you've met during the story isn't that unique of an idea and was probably pretty easy to implement. Also ending a DLC and whole game whose entire last act seemed to have taken place in the Wyndham Stadium, with another tournament held in Wyndham Stadium, is quite weird. So I wasn't really looking forward to this edition, but I was surprised just how much I enjoyed the tournament in the end. Because what sets it apart from just another endless array of Pokemon battles are the interactions between the characters. I haven't been able to do nearly everything yet, but from what I've seen, Game Freak have done a great job with making the interactions between characters unique and interesting. All the important people from the game and the DLC will show up as either opponents or your partner, so you will see all the gym leaders, as well as people like Peony, Clara, and even Shieldbird and Swordwood. It honestly kind of pains me that this fantastic roster of characters didn't get nearly enough time to shine in the main game, but at least they all got something in both DLCs now. Even the minor league of gym leaders is finally mentioned somewhere, unless I missed it somewhere else. If you don't know about it, Before the game was released, some misinformation made people believe there were going to be 18 gyms in Galar, with Game Freak quickly clarifying that the minor league was a lore only thing and not really in the game, which really was a shame. And now, instead of all the minor league gym leaders appearing, they get ignored once again, with the exception of your Isle of Armor rival who did make it to be a minor league gym leader. Kind of a missed opportunity, but I understand why it didn't happen, so I can't really fault the DLC for that. All in all, the Galerion Star Tournament is a really fun and well written addition to the game, whose gameplay falls quite short. You can use a full team of 6 Pokémon against opponents who only use 3, and your level isn't scaled either like it is in the Battle Tower. At least an option for that would have been great, because as it is now, the long-term engagement of unlocking all partners and seeing a lot of the great dialogue falls short because of the tedium of the 2 simple battles. The tournament also stands out because it adds content to an already existing place. So far the DLC for Sword and Shield only added new areas and things to do there, which was really disappointing given how bare bones the main games were. So it's great that, besides the tournament, the quest with the 3 legendary bird regional forms also adds some new stuff to old places. Once you approach the giant tree far up north of the map, you get a great cutscene showing off the rivalry of the birds, ending with them scattering all throughout Galar to become this game's idea of roaming Pokémon. And what a great idea it is. Before this, roaming Pokémon just appeared randomly in the tall grass on random routes. Sometimes the games even gave you ways to see where exactly you should look, like the storms when tornadoes or thunderous are near. Now you can clearly see the birds easily on the overworld, each one of them in one of the 3 wild areas of the game. Articuno in the Crown Tundra, Moltres flying around the Isle of Armor, and Zapdos runs to the original wild area. Luckily the game also makes them render far into the distance, so you can actually see them from far away, which is honestly how it should always be. Seeing a cool Pokémon far into the distance and trying to get to it is just how it should be. Luckily they realized this with the birds and the Wailord in the last DLC, so maybe we're gonna get more like this in the future. Another great twist on the roaming Pokémon idea is that each bird has a unique way to be approached. Articuno multiplies, Zapdos runs really fast, and Moltres just kind of flies its path and doesn't really care about you. Still, it's some great fun trying to avoid random wild Pokémon while chasing down after the Chocobo like Zapdos, or chasing Articuno through half the map after being too stupid to memorize its real position. It's honestly really great. I love the designs and the battle music is very fun, but story-wise there's nothing happening at all, which is kind of a disappointment. Luckily it was easily brushed away by the even bigger disappointment that is the Ultra Beast story. Each of the legendary hunt missions with Peony gets its own silly giant title, which is a cute idea. And thanks to the data mine from many months ago, we knew there would also be a quest specifically about Ultra Beasts, something I was really looking forward to, because I love Ultra Beasts and actually couldn't believe they would already bring them back. So while playing through the Crown Tundra, I was always looking for a way to start this quest, and near the end I almost started to believe that the quest was cut and no longer in the game. But then, once all the other mysteries about the legendaries are solved and Peony relocates to the Dynamax Adventure Cave, it finally starts, and basically immediately ends. You get one short conversation and the rest is you doing Dynamax adventures until you find and catch Necrozma, show it to him, and that's it. I would have loved for Looker and maybe Annabelle to return, for the UBs to spawn somewhere in the world and us having to catch them, pretty much exactly like in Sun and Moon's postgame. Instead it's just basically nothing but a shallow explanation as to why all the legendaries are even in this cave. I couldn't let it sour the experience of the Crown Tundra as a whole though. Instead I think this is gonna go into the record as the most popular bit of Pokemon that has been released since quite a while. At least until the new Pokemon Snap comes out, which will hopefully be fantastic. What's definitely obvious is that these 2 DLC experiences show us just where the Pokemon franchise is heading. I'm glad Game Freak is gonna get the practice in to create even better open areas for the next generation games, which we obviously shouldn't expect to see before 2022. Until then there's still a whole lot to do though, but thanks to the Crown Tundra, I am confident that it will turn out to be a pretty great experience, especially if they continue to work on some of the issues that show up here already. I've talked about the lack of trainer battles, but I also want to mention just how weird it is to enter buildings or the shrine and suddenly not being able to move the camera manually. Or how frustratingly simple the puzzles for the Reggies were, as much as I love the addition of the 2 new ones. Sword and Shield simply don't have a way to make puzzles work. Even the gyms were pretty simple in that regard. We just need HMs or something similar to them, because the bike just doesn't cut it by itself. And the update includes Peony gives you are a kind of quest log, which I've also wanted to see being used for side quests. The same goes for non-linearity, which this DLC offers in spades. Yes, it isn't exactly revolutionary for post-game content in Pokemon games, but should be lauded anyways. In the end, I really enjoyed both the Isle of Armor and the Crown Tundra equally, but for very different things. The Isle of Armor was, honestly, a lot more fun to explore for me, maybe because of the Diglett hunt. I just never really got a feeling for the Crown Tundra as much as I did for the Isle of Armor. As a package though, I much prefer the Crown Tundra, which is great because you can only buy the two DLCs together. And while they don't fix any of the flaws that Sword and Shield have, they've added quite a lot of great content to a game that really needed that. And I honestly feel a lot more positively about the 8th generation games than I did a few months ago. Let's all just hope that feeling sticks, and we will finally get a Pokemon game without painful compromises. I hope you've had as much fun with this video as I had making it. See you next time, bye!